Want to turn our attention to some national news. President Donald Trump and the White House are continuing their efforts to downsize the federal government and the federal workforce. More agencies are now making cuts. So with that, I want to bring in Scripps News Group's Joe St. George joining us live from Washington, D.C. Joe, we always appreciate your insight and context. So can you share a little bit more about what the next upcoming cuts are and their potential impacts?
Well, we're keeping an eye on federal workers this week, and particularly federal workers that have been on probation. We've already seen the reports, in many cases, aired the stories of thousands of federal workers that have been on probation that have lost their jobs in the last several days. The Associated Press reporting that IRS could terminate thousands of positions this week. More on that in a moment. I think over the course of the last several days, Aaron, the typical American has learned more about what a probationary federal government employee is. I mean, if you first glance, it may sound nefarious. It may sound like somebody's on probation. Did they have a disciplinary action? No. The way it works is when you join the federal government for the first time, that first year, you're typically on probation. And it's not just, let's say, new hires, people in their early 20s. People at all ages can be put on probation if they move from one federal government agency, let's say, to another government agency. In some cases, you're talking about career civil servants who view these new positions as promotions. So these are individuals across their professional resumes and across career spectrums. Legal experts say the Trump administration clearly believes there's more legal wiggle room to fire probationary employees than, let's say, employees not on federal probation. And we're following every angle of this because this is such a huge story for the Commonwealth of Virginia. You're talking about north of 100,000, close to 150,000 federal employees who live in Virginia alone. This could have a ripple effect on the Virginia economy, the housing market from Northern Virginia to Hampton Roads. So this is potentially a massive story for the Commonwealth, depending on the extent of these layoffs. Now back to the IRS. I think a lot of Americans who aren't in the federal government, they understand that if a federal worker lost their job, it impacts them and their family. But what about for non-federal workers? Well, Democrats on Capitol Hill are warning a decline in federal services, passport renewals, questions about food stamps, and yes, tax refunds and issues with the IRS in the middle of tax season if these layoffs continue. So we'll keep an eye on this. I think a lot of people are waiting for the impact on the everyday American. So far, that hasn't happened yet, but we're just at the beginning of this, Aaron.
Yeah, Joe, and that's not the only news coming out of the White House either. It's also preparing to have a major diplomatic summit with Russia and Saudi Arabia. So when will these talks happen? What's the significance of them, and what should we expect from them?
Hampton Roads, such a military community, always focused on, global conflicts around the world. So another, yes, it sounds international. It is an international story, but also with local ties. Overnight, Secretary of State Marco Rubio landing in Saudi Arabia. The Kremlin confirming that Russia's foreign minister will be in Saudi Arabia this week for talks tomorrow on the beginning of possibly ending the war between Russia and Ukraine. President Trump said over the weekend that he thinks President Putin is ready to stop fighting. There's controversy with everything these days. Here's the controversy here. Ukrainian officials, Ukrainian leaders say they aren't part of these discussions. And President Zelenskyy told Meet the Press over the weekend that they're not going to accept a peace deal that's negotiated between the U.S. and Russia. President Zelenskyy expressed grave concern with the fact that they haven't been invited to participate in these talks, and they think President Putin may be trying to wield too much influence on this particular issue. So we'll stay on top of this. Obviously, we're approaching the anniversary of the war on Ukraine beginning. Hard to believe it's been so many years of fighting. President Trump did campaign on ending the war in Ukraine. This is clearly a first big step in an attempt to do just that, Aaron.
Joe St. George from Scripps News Group live in Washington for us. Thanks so much.